It's the Q&A episode, next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Greetings, Go Blue. I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Coming up a little bit later on, we will go in depth on what we're hoping, anyway, is an impactful, trailblazing hire for Michigan football. Josh Gattis, former co-offensive coordinator, I should say, for the Alabama Crimson Tide and Penn State assistant coach, is now the new offensive coordinator for the University of Michigan. Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor, who joins me at Wolverine Digest. He will be joining us a little bit later on in this week's episode to break that down, as well as all the other late-breaking Michigan news. But we begin this week with your feedback. You know, I probably should have done this a while ago, but our channel has really grown and our traffic has really increased over the last few months. And thank you for that. We appreciate it. This is a labor of love. Nobody's getting rich here doing it. And those of you that support us at Patreon, I mean, I'm using a lot of that money to pay for Aaron and who's really the team that makes this thing go each and every week. So thank you. Really, I just do this because I'm a lifelong Michigan fan who loves talking about my beloved Wolverines. So I should have probably done a Q&A episode a while ago. I've been listening to Isaiah Hole from Wolverines Wire, his new podcast that he puts out each day. And he does a Q&A episode every week. And I was listening to that last week. I'm like, you know what? We should do a Q&A episode here with our audience. So that's what we're going to do. This is a good week to do it. It's kind of a slow week. Only one basketball game. Michigan's coming off playing Northwestern, one of the lesser teams in the league. Only one game this week. That's not until Saturday. So it's kind of a slow time. So it's a great time to pause and check in with all of you and answer as many of your questions as we can, beginning now. These are the questions you have tweeted to us in recent days. Shane Westwood asks, which player that we signed this offseason will make the biggest impact as a freshman? Well, I think it's Dax Hill is the most celebrated recruit Michigan has signed. And he plays a position that has been sort of a personnel weak link for Michigan for years. And that's a coverage safety. Michigan has had All-Americans like Ernest Shazor as in-the-box safeties. And now you have the new Viper position under Don Brown. But the further our safeties tend to get away from the line of scrimmage, the less effective they've tended to be going back for a long ways now. And so I think Dax Hill from Oklahoma is a difference maker there. But I'm going to go elsewhere. And I'm going to kind of say it's a tie. Two guys that are early enrolling that are both immediately going to compete at positions of need. I'm going to go with Zack Charbonnet, the outstanding tailback out of California. When you're talking about a guy who's well over 6 feet, 200 pounds, you're already looking at kind of a similar body frame to the one Anthony Thomas came here with 20 years ago when he played as a freshman. And that's the one area, we think Christian Turner has some promise. We kind of know Chris Evans has some athletic gifts and tools, but he's not really a bell cow running back. And with the departure of Karan Higdon, we're asking ourselves, hey, who's the guy that we could give the ball to on 3rd and 4? Or 2nd and long. And I think Zack Charbonnet, who's an early enrollee, will be an instant impact guy. And then I'm going to go with a guy that was a 5-star for a long time, kind of got downgraded for reasons I don't follow recruiting closely enough to know, but then blew up at the All-Star camps in the last month. And that's Chris Hitton, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. Rivals 100 just came out with him with their last update today. Had him the number 15 prospect in the country. He has his 5th star back, and of course, defensive tackle is a position where Michigan is going to need some help. Michigan's starting 4 on the defensive line is going to be really good, but right now we're not looking at having the depth there we've had the last couple of years. So I'm going to go with Chris Hitton as a guy that I think could also be an instant impact player. Our next question here on the Q&A episode of Michigan Podcast comes from Brandon Thompson, who says, has the window on making it to the college football playoff already closed with our talented wide receivers approaching draft eligibility and Justin Fields' impending transfer to Ohio? In other words, is any hypothetical transition to a more spread offense too little too late without coaching changes? Well, this is a great question. Some of it has been rendered moot, though, since you sent this to me, Brandon, with the hiring of Josh Gattis. He's already done some talking about, hey, we're going to see more of our athletes in space. I don't think Michigan needs to change its scheme because Harbaugh has actually evolved the offensive scheme here quite a bit. It's the game day coaching. It's the lack of flexibility when the initial game plan doesn't work. That's, I think, that having more scheme versatility, I think, is more important than changing our overall philosophy. And let me say this about Justin Fields. I'm assuming he'll be immediately eligible, the former 5-star quarterback who transferred from Georgia to Ohio State. I don't think that changes anything for Michigan. Even if Justin Fields is as great as everybody thinks he could be here, I don't think it changes anything. I mean, we haven't beaten him in 15 years. How do we go lower? Tell me we're kind of judgment proof in the rivalry right now. I mean, we're not even making it a rivalry. There's really only one way to go, and that's up. So, by the way, is Justin Fields going to do better than 50 touchdowns? We've had one quarterback in our league do that ever, and it was Dwayne Haskins last year. So even if he's as great as everybody says, I don't know that it changes much for Michigan. We already weren't beating Ohio State with lesser recruited quarterbacks. I don't know how he does better than the season Dwayne Haskins just had. So I don't think that has as much of an impact on Michigan as people think. If the rivalry was closer or we were the team that had been dominating as of late and he arrived, then he'd have a much bigger impact. But they're already dominating us. So they'll dominate us again. I mean, it's been 15 years. I mean, I don't really know how you get any more negative than that. I don't know if you can consider that good news. I'll leave that up to being in the eye of the beholder. Next question in our Q&A episode this week on Michigan Podcast. Ross Nanini asks, 3 wide receivers has to be our base offense next year, right? With Tariq Black, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Nico Collins and Oliver Martin, we need 3 of those guys on the field at all times, not to mention Giles Jackson, Mike Sanderstill, and George Johnson. I say that and realize we have some really athletic tight ends as well, but we need a 3 wide receiver base. Sam Webb at the Michigan Insider was listening to his radio show in the mornings, early mornings on WTKA today, and he mentioned at no point all year did Michigan run 10 personnel. Now, for those of you that don't know what that lingo means, it means the second number there is how many tight ends are in a set, which means the second number is 0. So at no point this season did Michigan run an offensive set that didn't have a tight end. And 11 personnel would be 1 tight end, 12 personnel would be 2, 13 personnel would be 3. So I think that goes to what you're talking about, Ross. And I also think 3 wide receiver sets can be very effective in terms of opening up the box for running the football better. We've seen Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma use this very effectively in the past. So yes, I don't think it's important to even have a base offensive set. What I think it's important is, when the other team is run blitzing every gap on first down and putting 79 guys in the box, can the offensive coordinator at Michigan count that and say, I don't think we can run against that? And therefore, go to a different formation that takes guys out of the box or throws the ball more often on first down. I don't think it's about a base set or a base philosophy. I think it's about game day adjustments and stubbornness. That's what I think it's about. Next question here in the Q&A episode, Six Doc says, how much influence does Jack Harbaugh have on Jim, specifically his philosophy of offense? Well, Jack Harbaugh is a huge guy when it comes to the running game. His teams at Western Kentucky ran the ball a lot. And we know that Jim believes in the running game as well. And hey, Alabama this year under Josh Gattis and Mike Loxley had the number 6 passing offense in the country, but they were only 4 rushing attempts fewer than Michigan per game. So, Josh Gattis is going to believe in the running game too. You have to be multifaceted. You just have to understand you're not going to road grade teams that are recruiting at or above your level. You're going to have to trick them. You're going to have to fool them. You're going to have some deception. You're going to have to break some tendencies, the kinds of things we haven't done in those kinds of big games in the past. So when you look at the kind of football coach Jim Harbaugh is, I have no idea how much influence his dad has had, but the fact that his dad is with him on a podcast every single week probably indicates his dad's pretty influential. His dad was probably pretty influential in convincing Jim to come back home. His dad had a fine tenure as an assistant coach at Michigan back in the day. So yes, I don't buy into the, let's hang co-divisional title banners. That would be self-owning called and said, don't go there, girlfriend. All right, I'm totally against all that crap that Jack was talking about on the Attack Each Day podcast recently. But when you look at Jack Harbaugh's overall contributions to Michigan and the influence he probably had on getting his son here, regardless of, the joke that would be hanging a co-divisional title banner, Jack Harbaugh has been pretty good. And the Harbaugh family's overall been pretty good for the University of Michigan. Our next question on our Q&A episode, Steve Phillips says, what will it take for the rampant cheating to stop and level the playing field for all schools? A major college coach trying to stand up like John Beilein did. Would anyone care? Well, here's the thing. As we pointed out last week in our episode when we talked about, could Michigan become like the next Clemson? Let's say Clemson is doing all the cheating Michigan urban legend message board claims. Let's say they're guilty of it all. Well, they're cheating to basically recruit, when you look at the average rating of players signed the last 4 years, basically the same level of talent that Michigan is recruiting. So I'm just not into excuses. I'm not into victimology. I am into accountability, but if we're going to have Wild West recruiting out there and we're going to have rampant cheating and it's not going to be enforced and you have no power to enforce it, I don't believe just sitting around being a victim and embracing the suck and saying, well, woe is me, mediocrity is us. I don't believe that's an option. You know what it means then? It means if other teams and schools are going to get away with doing things, under the table and below the board and not be punished for it, it means then you have 2 options. A, you could sit there and just say, well, I guess that's why we're going to suck. Hey, then you know what? Give us all the embrace the suck discount for the tickets, for the t-shirts, for every premium price we pay for everything with a Block M or a maize and blue Jumpman on it. No, you don't want to do that? Okay, then here's the other option. You have to be better. That means you're going to have to do more than not have a 2-minute drill. That means you're going to have to do more than, by golly, I guess we'll just keep running 7-step play action drops when we're down by 3 touchdowns at Ohio State. You're going to have to do better than, let's have a 9.5-minute, 2-minute drill at the end of the Peach Bowl before halftime. You're going to have to do better than that. John Beilein's done better than that. And he's kicking a lot of teams' ass who are cheating, allegedly cheating like mad. He's kicking their ass right now. So don't tell me it can't be done. I'm not into victimology. You know what? Be better. Do better. That's kind of my solution. I don't believe just sitting around and just taking it from people in any walk of life. I don't buy into that philosophy whatsoever. Next on our Q&A episode, Mr. Wolverine says, what's different about Michigan football today than in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s? They were co-division champs according to Big Ten offices. They won 10 games and lost their bowl games like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. That is true. Here's the other thing that's different, though. Cost a hell of a lot more money to go to a game and be a fan. Okay, and we have a playoff, which is really more of an invitational tournament that we didn't have back then. So, yes, in many respects, Harbaugh's record at Michigan is pretty similar to Lloyd Carr's. It's just Lloyd Carr was better against top teams than Jim Harbaugh has been so far. But in many respects, Michigan was a, 9-3, 10-2 kind of team that shared Big Ten championships and did that for even going back to the Schembechler years a lot of the time. But it's not the same era. Okay, it's not the 80s, it's not the 90s, it's not the 2000s. We don't have shared championships anymore. So again, this goes back to my answer to the previous question. We can sit around and say, boy, I remember when we watched those Bartles and James wine cooler commercials and we could tie for the Big Ten championship and go to the Rose Bowl with an 8-3 record and get our ass kicked by UCLA like we did in 82. We can do that. Or we can realize 82 is a Randy Travis song. It's also 37 years ago, okay? 37 years ago, like way before Al Gore invented the internet and stuff. 37 years ago, not relevant to the conversation we're having today. It's a new playing field. There are new rules. So it comes down to this. If you want to compete for championships, then you must be willing to do what it takes in order to do so. Real simple. Maybe not easy, but simple. Next question here on this week's Q&A episode. Shane Majewski writes, the talent gap between Ohio State and Michigan has narrowed, but their players always seem to make the play no matter what. Is it an experience in winning big games, or simply the coaching staff gets more out of their talent and puts them in better situations to succeed? Well, go back and watch the Michigan-Ohio State game. And if you watched a lot of Ohio State football this year like I did, you really saw their linebackers struggle in space. And so against Michigan, here's what the defensive coaches at Ohio State did. Stopped trying to get them to be good in space. And you know what they told them to do? You're coming downhill and shooting gaps every down. And sometimes you'll get home and make a big play, but we will force Michigan to prove it won't be stubborn and take advantage of this and make big plays down the field. But we're not going to sit here and give Michigan big plays by letting them catch you out of position. So we're going to be real simple here. You're coming downhill, you're shooting gaps, and try to get in the backfield as often and as fast as you can. In other words, they coached the talent they had and the ability they had to the best of their ability and did what it took to win. I'm not sure Michigan has always been willing to do this, especially in these big games. So yes, there is that goes to some of the point that you're trying to make in your question, Shane. Our guys have a tendency to pucker, and the other team's guys have a tendency to flourish. And some of that, again, comes from a lack of aggression in these big games. These are young men. They're men, but they're young men. And so they're going to take their cue a lot from the old men on the sidelines. And when the old guy on the sidelines is like, I really think we need to run a draw on 3rd and 8 because we can't block them. You know what the guys in the huddle are saying? Crap, man, we can't block him. Look at the play coach called. He knows we can't block him. Let's just get out of here and skedaddle. All right. So then on the other hand, when the coach on the other side's like, dude, man, we're going to the wall. We are not, no wasted ammo, no stone unturned. That filters to your players as well. So yeah, we tend to pucker in these situations. Our players do, because our coaches do in these situations as well. That is an excellent question, Shane. Appreciated all your questions. We couldn't get to them all. Got to as many as we could. We'll do another one of these Q&A episodes here in the near future as well. We'll come back, talk about the big move Jim Harbaugh made with Josh Gattis. Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor is going to join us next on Michigan Podcast. Thank you to all of you that are supporting us here on Patreon. We get asked frequently, hey, what can we do to support what you guys are doing here at Michigan Podcast? And one of the best ways to do that is to support us with a very inexpensive nominal contribution at Patreon. And as you can see, throughout the course of the year for our Patreon supporters, we do give you exclusive content we don't offer anywhere else, just as a way of saying thank you. So to all of you that have supported us throughout the year at Patreon, thank you. Thank you in advance to those of you who are willing to sign up and do so in the future, and go Blue. Go Blue back here on Michigan Podcast, and we are joined by my partner at Wolverine Digest, and you also know him as the mid-morning host of WTKA in Ann Arbor. Michael Spath is here with us. Good to see you, Michael, or hear you. How are you, brother?
I am doing fantastic, man. Just a dreary, cold, awful day in Michigan. But you know what? The basketball team is 17-0, and the football team has made some really encouraging hires in the last week. So there's a lot of bright, sunny skies here in Ann Arbor.
Well, one of them is in the corner of the screen underneath your phone announcement right now. That's Josh Gattis. Back when he was an assistant for James Franklin at Penn State, came to Penn State with Franklin from Vanderbilt, erstwhile former co-offensive coordinator at Alabama, and now the man that Jim Harbaugh said on his podcast yesterday is going to run the whole offense. Talked a lot about his philosophy. He's been tweeting out hashtag speed in space. That's catching the attention of some players and some recruits. You've even had some players. Shane Patterson maybe took fired off a blast. Tariq Black, I heard, retweeted one of your criticisms of some of the game day offensive play calling. So do you believe this is a watershed moment for Coach Harbaugh and Michigan, this hire?
You know what? I do, but I'm still a little bit cautious about it, just because as we were reading some of the comments that he made on the Attack Each Day podcast with Jim Harbaugh and his dad Jack, and about utilizing players in space, and about putting his best players in position to maximize their talent and all those things, I was getting more and more excited. And then my colleague over at Inside the Huddle, Zach Shaw, found a quote from Pep Hamilton where he pretty much said the exact same stuff a year ago at this time about opening up the offense and being more spread concepts and going four wide and putting the guys in best position to be successful. So I do think to some degree this is coach speak. What encourages me about the hire is that it's outside of the Jim Harbaugh coaching tree. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, a lot of the guys that Jim has hired in the past have been people he worked with previously at the University of San Diego, or at Stanford, or with the San Francisco 49ers. Guys that have understood Jim Harbaugh and his philosophy, and along the way either fell in line with that philosophy, or they Jim Harbaugh, a lot of guys that have been surrounding him that are to some degree yes men, that whatever you say goes, Jim, and haven't really challenged. And so now you're bringing in an outside influence who, at least according to Jim Harbaugh, he's handing the keys over to. It's going to be his offense. A guy that when you look at his past two stops, so it should be really exciting to Michigan fans, because his previous two stops, he was at Penn State when they've had Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley, Deshaun Hamilton, Mike Gesicki, the tight end, and they've run essentially like a little bit of a power spread there, where a lot of throwing the ball, but using the quarterback and the running back in positions where they got them in space and took advantage of the mismatches that they created. And then here you go to Alabama in 2018, and it's a team that can physically overwhelm you with a powerful offensive line and all-around running backs, and yet Tua Tagovailoa, the great sophomore quarterback at Alabama, set school records in passing yards and in passing touchdowns. He threw for close to, I think, 4,200 yards and close to 40 touchdowns. So, this is a guy who understands modern-day offense And I think the very fact that Jim Harbaugh is saying, this is my guy and this is my offensive coordinator, should be exciting to Michigan fans.
I wrote a piece at Wolverine Digest last week listing 4 reasons I thought this was a huge hire for Michigan. The first one is recruiting. Recruiting is like location in real estate. It's the first 3, foundations and pillars of a college coaching job. 24/7 Sports has their rankings of all the recruiters in college football. Right now, they rank Gattis the 23rd best recruiter in college football, which puts him as already the 2nd best recruiter on the Michigan staff, behind only Chris Partridge. And if you look at the rest of 24/7's rankings, I think Jay Harbaugh is 70th. I think Don Brown's around 56th. And so when you throw those 2 in alongside Josh and Chris Partridge, Michigan now becomes the only school in the Big Ten, Michael, that has 4 of the top 70 recruiters on the 24/7 recruiter rankings on one staff. So even if this guy is a mediocre offensive coordinator, even if this guy is given no further power than Pep Hamilton was given, we've already dramatically upgraded from Pep Hamilton in the recruiting department, near as I can see.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And I mean, when you look at the areas that he's recruited, I mean, he's developed relationships in the South. He's developed relationships on the, in Pennsylvania, working with the Penn State staff. He was previously with James Franklin at Vanderbilt, so he has a lot of experience in SEC country. And I don't know what makes, honestly, I'll be frank about it. Like, I don't know what makes a great recruiting coach. I think it's a combination of, and I would normally say youth and enthusiasm. But Don Brown is not young, though he does have a lot of enthusiasm. I think it's just an ability to connect with players and reach them on their level, and then also sell them on what their role and what a future at a particular school will look like. I have never myself ever been a recruiting guy, so I don't know what it entails, what it takes to be great at it, but those are the things that I suspect. And from all indications, he's a guy that, at Penn State a couple of years ago, and I'm sure you have the names in front of you, landed a 5-star recruit. He was a primary recruiter for. He landed a 5-star recruit at Alabama that he was the primary, the lead guy for. So the proof is in the pudding, as they like to say, and certainly he looks to be one of the best recruiters in college football. And I know we haven't brought him up yet, but if you bring in the new defensive assistant, Anthony Campanelli, who is ranked, I think, in the 140 range, if you correct me, but that's at Boston College. And the reason he's, by all indications, he might be a top 100 recruiter nationally. He's just never had the program to fully sell like he does now.
You mentioned the transition that Josh helped to implement at Alabama. And, we're talking about a guy, even though he's 34, this is also a guy with 8 years of Power 5 coaching experience. So you're getting a guy who has coached, and including Penn State and Alabama, those are also big-time national programs. So you're getting a guy that has already cut his teeth, but you're getting him, to borrow a Harbaugh-ism, while he's ascending, while he is now beginning to realize his potential as a coach. And, you talked about Alabama and the passing game that they had this year. They averaged only 4 fewer rushes per game than Michigan. And Nick Saban can be just as stubborn legendarily as Jim Harbaugh. Saban's also an NFL pro-style guy. This comes down to, I believe, is situational awareness and flexibility. Someone who comes in and can count how many guys are in the box and say, we just can't run against that many guys in the box against Notre Dame the way we can against Western Michigan. Someone who understands that, we've got to have a counterpunch. Someone who understands, the difference between, say Joel Zamaya and Trevor Hoffman is when Joel Zamaya couldn't throw 105 anymore, he was out of the league. Trevor Hoffman went to the Hall of Fame by learning how to throw a changeup when he couldn't throw 105 anymore. That's what our offensive scheme has lacked. Jim has changed the scheme a lot. We ran zone read this year. We opened up in the spread against Notre Dame when Shea Patterson hadn't played football in almost a year. I mean, he has changed the scheme a lot. It's the game day play call puckering. That's what's killing us, Michael.
I mean, I don't really need to add anything there, do I, Steve? I mean, you and I are in a complete agreement about this. I mean, we had a caller on our show on Tuesday say that, what needs to happen is Michigan needs to be better play calling against Ohio State. And what really needs to happen is Michigan just needs to call the game against Ohio State that they called it in 2017. Mm-hmm. Where was that game plan in 2018? Where was that game plan in 2016? Why is it that in some of these critical moments, they do seem to just get away from what makes them special, and that is, and I do think part of it too, Steve, is a recognition of what is special, is overvaluing maybe the running game for Michigan, is kind of inflating how good the running game is. I mean, I go back to the comments that multiple reporters with their inside sources talking to assistant coaches, and how the assistant coaches were so brazen about their belief that they were going to run right over Ohio State like they had done so against Wisconsin and like they had done so against Penn State. And the comment that I heard was pregame, one of the assistant coaches just saying, like, this is like, watch us do to them what we did to Penn State. Watch us do to them what we did to Michigan State when we wanted to run the football. And according to my friend, he said, well, that's Penn State and Michigan State. And the guy said, doesn't make a difference. We're so good right now. We're going to do it against the Buckeyes. And it was just such a gross miscalculation, right? And I can understand having confidence. I go back and I tell the story, 2006 Michigan-Notre Dame game, and I see Fred Jackson, great, legendary running backs coach, at a car wash the day before. And I said to Fred, I go, gosh, you guys have won 2 games, but now you got to play Notre Dame on the road. They're number 2 in the country. And he looks at me and he says, the week that we've had, we're going to go out there and we're going to kick their ass. You can mark it down. And you know what they did, Steve? They went out there and kicked their ass.
47-21.
So I can understand coaches being confident in their scheme and confident in their players and believing in them, but it was a miscalculation that what you were able to do against Penn State, you were going to be able to do against Ohio State with better front seven. 5 stars at defensive line and 5 stars at linebacker and just kind of and just banking a little bit too much on your own success. And so I think that was the problem with the offense in that game. But what I hope is someone like Josh Gattis understands, look at the Alabama game against Clemson. It didn't ultimately succeed. But after they struggled, they started off throwing that football a lot. And after Tua struggled, they went to the running game and started focusing on the running game. Now, I think where they got a little bit away from themselves is they then went back to Tua, and Tua was just never quite himself in that national championship game. But when all of a sudden they got into a box corner, and their great left-handed southpaw quarterback was struggling in the first half, they were immediately allowed to go to something else. Michigan doesn't have that instead of the counterpunch.
Yep.
They spent 11 weeks ignoring their passing game, and then suddenly needed it against Ohio State. And it just doesn't work that way. Every former player you talk to says you cannot flip a switch in college football. You just cannot say, hey, we've got these great wide receivers, we've got this great quarterback, let's all of a sudden turn it on. It doesn't work that way. And so what I want to see is just the complete development of this offense. And we have to wait a while. Obviously, there's no game. But, Steve, how many times did you and I during this past season complain about not throwing the ball more or not working on certain things in games that were blowouts? Next year, Michigan opens the season with Middle Tennessee State. And I swear to God, if they run the ball 50 times and throw it 15-18, then I'm going to know 100% in that moment that Josh Gattis is a figurehead and nothing more, because that cannot be what Michigan football does again in 2019.
Finally, Michael, just to reinforce your point, I've heard people call your show the last few weeks and say, why can't we do like what Lloyd Carr did in that 2000 Orange Bowl against Alabama when they couldn't throw the ball and they just run the ball and just threw it every down with Tom Brady and came back, forgetting that was the same Lloyd Carr who refused to make that adjustment in the 07 Rose Bowl, and Pete Carroll did, and we got our rear ends kicked. Well, if you go back and watch that 99 season, we were way behind at Michigan State. brought Tom Brady in over Drew Henson and went to the exact same kind of offense, a constant 2-minute drill in order to come back. Did the same thing against Penn State in that game later in the year when we had fallen behind. In other words, earlier in the season, and they didn't just sit there in the Orange Bowl after running Anthony Thomas against 97-man fronts 30 times and then just suddenly decide, you know what, man, let's just try throwing on the SEC champions and see what happens. Over the course of the season, when they struggled to run the ball, because that was actually not a great year running the football for Michigan, despite all those guys up front and Anthony Thomas, over the course of the year, they developed their ability to switch up situationally when that happened, and that's why they were able to do it in the Orange Bowl. And that's part of this conversation that's been going on that you just addressed that's largely been forgotten, and I think a very key point. That's very well said, Michael.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is coaches are very pragmatic and they're very stubborn. And so when they find something that they think works, they stick with it and stick with it. I think the biggest fault that lies with coaching from I'm looking at this bird's eye view, being able to see the whole field, hindsight, all the different things. But I think coaches get so locked in with a certain game plan that they've spent a week on, that how often do you see coaches abandon that? I think the really, really good coaches are the ones that within the first 15 minutes of a game, and maybe if you really want to extend it to the first 30 minutes of a game, will be like, okay, we have to throw it out. We have to throw the whole thing out. The game plan we came in with, the play call we came in with, we're throwing that out, and we're going to page 2. We're open up the new playbook and going for it. So often you see coaches wait until now you're down 28 points in the fourth quarter, and finally like, well, we got to start throwing the ball. That's one of the biggest criticisms of Jim Harbaugh, is that he takes too long, and he, in a little bit of, when you look at the Wisconsin game, they really broke through the second half. The Penn State game, they broke through earlier than that. The Michigan State game, I don't know that they ever truly broke through, maybe the fourth quarter, but it's believed that if we just keep on pounding, it'll eventually work for us. It would be a far better move for them to realize 30 minutes into a game, 20 minutes into a game, we're not running on this team, and that's not going to change, and we need to do something else. Or we're not passing on this team. Our quarterback is off in this game. He's trying to throw into too tight of spots. We got to change the play calling. We've got to change what we're doing a little bit here. I don't understand why it doesn't happen more frequently where they just abandon. I think it's because there's too much pride involved. I spent a week developing this game plan that if my guys execute properly, we'll be able to succeed. And it's almost a little bit of like a litmus test for each individual coach. I believe too much in myself, and that's got to change with every coaching staff. You've got to be able to switch gears, and you've got to be able to recognize earlier in a game that's not working for you.
Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor. Good to have you back on the program, Michael. We'll do it again next week. Go Blue, brother.
All right. Thanks, guys.
If you like what we do here, WolverineDigest.com is the website. We update it frequently with commentary. If you don't want to wait until Tuesday and when a new episode gets unveiled each week, keep updated each and every week at WolverineDigest.com. Both myself and Michael Spath from WTKA and Ann Arbor write commentary there each and every day. WolverineDigest.com. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, do you care if Michigan basketball is ranked number 1 in the country, as the Wolverines may be if they beat Wisconsin on Saturday, given Duke's loss? 67% of you said no. Now, come on. Really? I mean, you can't win the Big Ten, in mid-January. You can't get to the Final Four in mid-January. We don't play Michigan State for more than a month. I mean, I'm not saying it's like the end result, end all, be all, but tell me what could happen right now as a Michigan basketball fan that would be better than, the pub and the PR and, the peacock strut you get to do for having the number 1 team in the country. How can you not, how can that not be something you care about? I mean, bah humbug. You guys, come on. It's okay. Hey, listen, don't let the way the football season ended. Don't let it, spoil a good thing. It's okay to be happy as Michigan fans when your team's number one in the country. All right? It's okay. Speaking of bah humbug, this week's question of the week comes from Ron Bobian, who says, you have unique opinions on the University of Michigan sports and many fans who like your YouTube channel. I really wish you the best. But I just feel that posing with a fake degree doesn't help the credibility of your vlog and puts you dangerously close to James Yoder territory. Okay. I didn't really know who James Yoder was, except for, sometimes I watch him get blown up in my Twitter mentions. I don't, some people liked him, many people didn't, but I've subscribed to the Wolverine since John Borton ran it himself for Stu Coleman, and it was a newspaper. I used to get it delivered to my house on Vineland Avenue in Grand Rapids. I was with Scout when it basically first started under Jim Heckman, and I ran the Iowa State sports site for them and have been a subscriber to Go Blue Wolverine back when Tom Beaver started it. When he left Rivals, there was the big split with that site and the back and forth. I have subscribed to both of those sites and magazines and newspapers now for going on 2 decades. I used to get paid to write columns for Beaver when he ran Go Blue Wolverine. So outside of those guys, and now it's not Scout, it's 247 or 24/7, and that's how I know who Isaiah Hull, who I referenced earlier, because he used to be part of that outfit. Outside of those 2 guys, I'm just a busy dude with like 9 jobs. I'm like Jamaican and a family, so I don't know too much about who covers Michigan other than those guys and Nick Baumgartner and Angelique Shingelis. By the way, congrats for being Michigan Sports Writer of the Year. So I don't know all this inside baseball. And before Christmas, I had somebody who's one of the insider posters on the message boards, I think for 24/7, just kind of out of the blue, asked me what I thought of James Yoder. And I told him exactly, he emailed me on Facebook, and I told him exactly what I just told you guys. I don't really know much about him. And most of what I've known about him emerged from last Friday when Michigan Sports Information Director Dave Abeloff blew him up. I've never seen. I've worked full time in media for over 20 years. It's how I've put food on my family's table. In sports and in politics, I've never seen a rebuke anything close to that. I mean, I was like, yo. But again, I'm doing this for fun. I'm not making a living doing this. It's a labor of love. It's something to give me an outlet, to give me a distraction from the back and forth negativity and tribalism of my day job in news and politics. And I'm just a guy who's, been a fan since I was a 10-year-old kid, and now I'm 45. So I'm basically a lifelong fan. I don't have really much of a financial stake in this. It truly is a labor of love. Let me apologize. If any of you out there are like Ron Bobian and thought that I was presenting this, I couldn't get into Michigan. I wanted to to go to Michigan my whole life. I scored like a 16 on the math portion of the ACT, and they told me I needed to go to junior college to get my math grade up. I couldn't get into Michigan. And so I ended up having to attend Michigan State and went there and rooted for Michigan the entire time I was there, like Doug Karsh, basically. So I'm sorry. This is not a diploma. If you didn't know that, I'm sorry. It's an Etsy craft that my wife bought for me for my birthday about a year ago. She thought it was cute and that I would like it. I happen to think it's adorable. And this is clearly just a fun thing. I'm not a reporter. I'm not an insider. That's why we have Michael Spath on here every week. It's why we've had Josh Henske from the Michigan Insider on here, why we've had Mark Dotson, or Dotman, as many of you know him, from the Michigan Insider. It's why we've had Chris Ballas on here and John Borton on here from the Wolverine. I mean, those guys do actual work. I'm just reacting to the work they do like all the rest of you are. I mean, all my information is stuff you could subscribe, purchase, and or research yourself. Okay. So I am not any kind of king of Michigan media. Hell, I'm barely the king of my own home. I'm just a Michigan fan. I'm not trying to front, perpetrate, play, none of that. I'm just a 45-year-old guy from Iowa that just loves the Wolverines and, has a fully functioning television studio and some spare time and is trying to share that love with other Michigan fans on YouTube, iTunes, podcast platforms. That's it. So I'm not a grad. I'm not an insider. I'm not a reporter. We do our very best when we talk about information that other people acquired to give them attribution. And I do that when I write at Wolverine Digest or post at Michigan Podcast on Twitter as well. And that, again, that's not a diploma. It's just a really cute birthday gift, an adorable Etsy craft that my wife got for me for my birthday. So I didn't really mean to step on anybody's toes. So I hope we can all now move on and get back to enjoying being one of the last two undefeated remaining teams in college basketball. Go Blue, and we'll see you next week.